I'm Ray Mears. My job is keeping people alive in the wilderness. Welcome to Extreme Survival. Alaska has always been a place where survival is the name of the game, as the passengers and crew of the Farallon discovered when they were stranded for a month in the depths of winter and their ship frozen in history. It's a place where a little knowledge can save your life in summer or winter, and no one ever takes anything for granted. The world may be getting smaller, but there are still plenty of wild places where you can come and enjoy yourself. Mind you, they're the sort of places where if you make one mistake, you can end up miles from help, having to make life or death decisions. We're in Alaska, the largest state in America and one of the last great wildernesses. Perched in the northwest corner of the states, Alaska stretches far into the Arctic Circle and has weather to match. Even in summer, it never really warms up, and in winter, temperatures can plummet to 40 degrees below freezing. Alaska is staggering. It's much bigger than Britain, France and Germany combined, and yet has a population of just 600,000 people. That's about one person per square mile. So it's not surprising that people get into difficulties out here on a fairly regular basis. Like the passengers and crew of the Farallon, wrecked on a reef and transformed into a ghostly iceberg. Incredibly, they survived a month before rescue. And the dog musher, lost for over a week in the freezing wilderness. It's the space that attracts people, the idea of getting away from it all. There's nothing better than exploring on your own terms, far from the tourist trail. And in summer, it can be light 24 hours a day. It really is fabulous. Alaskans have their own way of getting around. They use float planes like we use cars. But it's all too easy to get into trouble, as airline engineer Mike Legler found out when he set off beachcombing one summer's day.
Children were at school and my wife was at work. It was my day off. They had no idea I was even going flying that day.
He'd already been to one lake, but it was such a beautiful day he thought he'd keep going. But at the next lake, he misjudged his landing.
Didn't file a flight plan. I ventured out way too far and ended up about 250 miles from my home. Made a descending left turn due to the steepness of the mountains on the side of the lake. The reflection back into the water gave me sort of a vertigo, disorientation. I must have been 6 inches above the water. The front of the left float caught the water. There was a loud crash. Bang. And that's all I remember until I woke up in the airplane, submerged. I was confused because I still had one hand on the yoke and one hand on the throttle like I was flying. And I couldn't see out of my right eye. And I put my hand up to my eye and pulled away. It was all blood. The door opened and I swam out under the wing up to the surface and started to swim away from the airplane. And as I did, the engine weight pulled the nose down, the tail went up, and there was just an eerie wisp as it just below the surface and was gone. And then I realized how far I had to swim. When I got out of the water, I was so weak from the cold I could barely walk. I could walk 10 or 20 feet, fall, get up, walk some more. And I remember shivering so bad that I couldn't control my actions. I found a rather large driftwood log to get behind out of the breeze, and I started a fire. It was very difficult to light a fire. The driftwood was wet, and nothing would burn. And I would get just a little bit of a smolder and I would blow on it, and the blood dripping from my head would put the fire out. I had a handkerchief and I took the shoelace out of my left tennis shoe and tied the shoelace around my head to hold it in place, and it seemed to stop the bleeding. In my survival vest, I had a small package of cigars. They were soaked and wet, and I pulled the cellophane off the package and flicked off the water and put it underneath, and it lit instantly, and then slowly added larger and larger pieces of kindling until it was a good-sized fire.
Mike's next action probably saved his life. He decided to take his soaking clothes off and dry them by the fire. You lose heat 25 times faster when you're wet than when you're dry. But even so, many people in the same circumstances probably wouldn't take theirs off.
I wrung out the excess water and placed them over the log to get the heat from the fire. Dried my clothes while I continued to watch for boats or airplanes. Nothing came all that afternoon or that evening till dark. And I knew I had to stay by that fire. That way I survived the night at least, and I got semi-dried off. But I don't remember sleeping much that night. When there were no boats out there the next morning, it occurred to me that I might stay there, end up there a long time. So I decided that if I was going to survive, I needed to walk out of there. And I got approximately 5 miles, and I had to climb over about a 200-foot steep side of the hill. And it occurred to me that if I took a fall there and broke an ankle or a leg or an arm, I'd be even more trouble than I was already in. So I turned around and I walked back to the beach where I was. I remember sitting on the log and thinking over my options, and I didn't see that I had any options. And what depressed me a lot was I knew what my family was beginning to go through, and I really felt like a fool for putting them through this. As I was sitting there, I remember turning around looking at the woods behind me, and something didn't look right. I realized that somebody had cut some trees down. I got up and I walked back into the woods, and as I started down this little overgrown trail, there was a plywood shack cabin. And I ran down to this thing, and I found a bag of moldy peanuts, some tools, some nails, and some dirty brown rolled up carpet on the floor. And I remember thinking, now my options have changed. I knew I could stay there for quite a length of time. I'd assumed with the carpet that was in there, I could make sort of a sleeping bag pouch, and I could possibly get warm that night. And I remember climbing in the sleeping bag and actually felt semi-warm for the first time in a day and a half. I had hope then that tomorrow would be a better day. Something will come along. I was bored, so I spent the next day and a half using the remaining carpet to make myself a hat and a vest to try and stay warm. It was something to pass the time, to keep my mind occupied and keep me from going crazy. I made this hat and this vest. It wasn't very fashionable, but it did the job. And at one point I thought of, I wonder how they make sleeves. And I decided that was way too complicated. And then I found a small piece of rope to tie around it to hold it closed. But it kept the wind off, and it did the job.
What Mike was going through is common in many survival situations as he experienced a cocktail of powerful emotions.
It was really odd. The mood would cycle from feeling really happy about little things that happened to severe depression. I remember sitting there on that beach for hours at a time, just depressed, and the thought of losing my airplane, that little airplane, and I had been all over this state, and knowing what my family was going through, and what a creep I'd been for doing that to them, and wondering about what my destiny was going to be out there.
It was now over a week since Mike's crash.
I was very depressed and very weak. I had assumed that I wasn't going to make it through the night. In the woods I found a regular white paper plate